Hi, folks. We'll just got some other people logging in, but I think we'll go ahead and get started today. Welcome. Thank you. Appreciate you joining us again. Today was our webinar as part of an ongoing educational series for Epicor. I'm Steve Burns with Crawford Software, and today I'm joined by Oren Colgrove, Crawford Software's Director of Customer Care.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone.
Today, Oren will be analyzing the FIFO and lot FIFO part costing methodology in Epicor ERP 10.2. One of the things we strive for here at Crawford Software is to provide customers with as much information as we can to help them make informed decisions when they're deciding on an ERP system. These monthly webinars are offered as a way to provide helpful information as well as tricks of the trade that we've learned over our 10-year partnership with Epicor, and we hope you find them helpful. So we still have some folks logging in. I'll go a little background on Crawford Software, and then I'll go ahead and turn it over to Oren. So Crawford Software, we are trusted advisors to customers implementing ERP systems. Our job is to provide you with as much information as we can. So that means pros and cons of different products. We have a very strong feel for the competitive product landscape. We help arm you with data to help you make the right decision. Ultimately, what we're trying to accomplish is to improve efficiencies within our manufacturing customer base. We work with you through requirements gathering. We would be your implementation team, help do software customization, as well as training and support. And our ultimate goal, and the goal for any customer implementing ERP, is to show you the best way to use Epicor to maximize efficiencies that drive costs down and profitability up. We all know in today's world that you have to do more with less, and ERP certainly can help provide that. So how do we do it? Well, we've got 25 years experience implementing ERP systems. Our value is we know what to expect when it's time to implement ERP. We know what the pitfalls to watch for. We know the best paths to success because we've done this for so long. We do it with an amazing group of 35 consultants worldwide, really broken between functional and technical expertise. And we also offer a dedicated offshore team. That helps provide cost-saving alternatives as well as flexibility for customers that may be implementing over the weekend or after hours or something like that that provides that level of flexibility. So we've got lots of happy customers. We hope certainly that you will become one too. Every year we do a customer satisfaction survey, and what it does is provide what's called your NPS score. And your NPS score, your Net Promoter Score, is those customers that promote you versus those that detract from you. And in 2017, the last one we did, we got a NPS score of 93%, which basically translates to we have lots of satisfied customers. So when we say trusted advisor, it's not just a moniker. It's something that we believe in here at Crawford Software, something that we strive for every day. And that's just a little background. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Oren Colgrove, for his presentation today. Oren, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate it. Again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. This is going to be a deep subject that we have that will drive on our FIFO costing. Epicor's methodology has many different cost methods. So what this is driving on all the way through FIFO costing itself. We have two different methods within the FIFO costing. Those are called FIFO costing and lot FIFO costing. All right. So our agenda for today is we're going to first talk about the FIFO costing, give you general elements in regards to FIFO costing itself. Then we're going to talk about lot FIFO costing and that in there. And then we're going to talk about multiple examples, but a big one that we always run into is with RMAs and the dispositions and the stuff coming back into stock. Once it's gone out the door, how does that cost come back in? We'll go through a couple examples then of the front side of it as well. And then at the end, I'm going to also give you the transactions and the steps that there are there. I won't drive and talk to each one of those, but those will be available in the presentation. And if there's any additional questions in that, please put those into the chat as we are going through, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. Without any further ado, let's start talking about FIFO costing. What is FIFO? It's your first in, first out. It's a nomenclature that's been out there for a very long time. It's designed to be giving you the thoughts of first material that came in the door is the first material that goes out the door. So it's a costing method to record the value of that inventory. It uses the price of the oldest quantity in the warehouse as the cost for the next quantity to be issued or shipped. It takes an assumption that you have knowledge of how the inventory is put away and how you have things set up. It assumes that you haven't taken that part when it came in the door, put it on the back corner of the shelf, and then it sits there for a very long time before it's ever used because you have others that come in. It takes the assumption that you are taking that one and you put it in, and that's the first one then that's used. As long as the quantity remains there of that original, it uses that cost value until it's consumed. Now, that doesn't mean that you're using the wrong one in the inventory. It just means from a costing side, it's assuming that you're using that. So within Epicor, we have the method is FIFO, but it creates what we call cost queue records to track each price on the date of which the part quantity was received. Yes, you can also have multiple for that same date. And those get what we call subsequence numbers. So you can receive multiple on the same day, and you will have multiple cost queue records for that same part on the same day of receipt. So as you consume, it will use the oldest first. At the time that the quantity goes to zero, it takes and deactivates that cost queue record. It doesn't delete it, because it gives us the accuracy then for audit and traceability and being able to do additional analysis from a costing perspective with some custom reports, and that from your part transactions and also from your receipts, and being able to also see the layers that there are associated to your cost queues. So when you are consuming, if you don't have enough in one of the cost queues, it will use the oldest cost queue first, and then it will take and use the next cost queue record. And yes, it does do a calculation, and you'll see that when we go through the example of how it does that calculation and picks that information up. The application uses the sum of the actual FIFO costs to determine the extended cost, instead of deriving it from a weighted average. And you'll see that as we go through as well, because weighted average is going to be in the system there as well. But with my FIFO costing, I also have another location that information is all stored and is used as we go through. On your FIFO costing, if you've issued the part to a job and the quantity is not consumed during the production process and it's returned to inventory, the actual FIFO layer issued to the job will be returned in reverse order, starting from the latest issued FIFO layer. Remember that when we talk about the example, because when we take and we return with RMAs, that oldest layer, if you have multiple layers that have to be used, does it in the reverse order. Sometimes gets you caught because it says, wait a minute, how did I get that cost on the return but it was actually the most current or oldest one that was returned. You can also do inventory adjustments when you do this, and it uses the average for all the quantities. The one thing that it does not use the FIFO cost on, it uses the average cost on when you do the adjustments. So you have that. You can also do price changes. This one I always caution people on because you can apply a price change to the cost SKU record, specifically to a FIFO record itself. You can go and change the price. If it's in inventory, it will affect the inventory account itself. If it's needed for issued quantities, however, the variance is recorded to the GL control. And as all of you understand, that GL control can come from many different places. It can be on the transaction type that you're doing. It could be associated to a reason code. It could be associated to the part class. It could be associated to the product group, or it could be associated to the part. And if it doesn't have any on any of those, it could then go back to the company configuration and your GL controls on your transactions. So you have all of those associated there. That's FIFO high level broad. Now, lot FIFO costing. What is that about? Well, it's the cost in a lot by using the FIFO method. So it's an accurate way to calculate the cost of quantities with inventory. When you're using lot tracking, lot control itself, it's typically used when you have different batches of similar products that are tracked, but also when you have the process that you have a part that's a lot control and you're receiving in multiple different receipts, potentially in the same day. I might have someone that is doing a production run, and the production run is for 1,000, and in the first hour of the day they produce 100. Second hour of the day they produce another 100. Each one of those production elements get different cost layers associated to them. So it again, very similar to the FIFO costing. It is a great, accurate tracking for audit purposes, and also gives you some capabilities to be able to, again, create some custom reports, some VAQs, and things like that, that then you can create and see some differences and see what you're tracking really on your cost of your parts are. Again, it also, lot FIFO uses the next quantity to be issued, the cost at the time it was received, and it also reduces the cost layers in the first in, first out methodology. And so outside of lot numbers going into them, and that it has pretty close to the same exact processes, except when you come to RMAs and things in that nature, when you're producing those. And when you do your shipments, if you are shipping specific lots, it's going to use that lot number in the shipment cost for the FIFO layer that is being used. Lot FIFO, it also still stores both the weighted FIFO average, and it stores the FIFO subcomponent costs. And those are separate fields so that you're then able to track and see, again, those capabilities as you drive through. The same thing, again, you can also have non-consumed parts that can go back into stock, and it uses it in that reverse order. And you also can do your price changes on your lot FIFO parts themselves. So that's lot FIFO in its high level as well. Again, it's pretty much similar to what FIFO costing is. So when we kind of talk about those, we almost talk about them in parallel and the same time. There is then the costing logic that is used as quantities are used. Specific logic is used to calculate the results. At the end of this document, show each of these calculations, but here's the list of types of transactions. When you think about doing transaction processes, here's the transactions that you have. And this bottom right one, the cost method hierarchy, this is how the hierarchy goes when it thinks about the processes itself. So we have our increase in our from our inventory, our received inventory, our return material to inventory, RMAs, which we will be talking about next in relationship to this. Return from the customer to inventory, there we go. Adjust our inventory, increasing and decreasing, adjusting our costs. Those are your main transactions that are going to affect your FIFO costs. So with that, let's talk about the one that we see a lot in regards to a lot of questions on our return from our customer to inventory. So our RMA disposition. We are going to take it in a little bit simpler format in that the disposition is going to go to stock. We're not going to go and disposition it to a job or to scrap at this point. This is strictly going to be dispositioning this back into stock after it's gone through the process. So when material that was originally costed using either the FIFO or the lot FIFO, I'll just say FIFO from now on, Epicor uses this logic here. If the RMA line specifies an invoice number in line, as many of you know, it does not need to have that. When you do RMA, you do not have to put that information in. And if you do, it actually helps your FIFO process. So if you're using RMAs and you're bringing material back and you are FIFO costing, if it's possible to find out what that invoice number and line number were, that would be a big help to you in getting the cost back in the cost that they were when they went out the door, as you'll see as we go through this. So Epicor then goes and finds the invoice, and of course with the invoice then I can go and get the pack ID, which then gives me all the information for the transaction for that, which is then linked to the part tran, which has that breakdown of all the subcomponent costs for that shipment. So, and if the shipment's not totally returned yet, so I only received one out of a shipment of 3, then the shipped FIFO layer with any of the remaining, or what we call eligible quantities, they can be used by the RMA disposition for the return. This, again, as I said earlier here, it uses the original FIFO layer from the shipment, and that when it does a return. Now, it might create multiple layers based upon if there were different cost layers when the shipment went out and it had to use different cost layers. So if the invoice shipment does not have enough quantity left for the RMA, and on the RMA line, or it does not have an invoice and line number, Epicor finds what we call the last generic shipment transaction for the part, regardless of the customer. So if I had shipped this out originally 3 years ago, I'm sure my costs have changed from now, and now I had just done a shipment this last week, and it went out to somebody entirely different, and I did an RMA, and I didn't put the invoice line, or I don't have any information put in there, it's going to get that last layer of the one that went out the door. So this generic shipment also stores the breakdown of the actual FIFO costs, which are used as what we call reference costs for the RMA disposition, which, as we process it, are used to make the subcomponent costs for that cost layer as it goes into stock. Doesn't matter if the generic shipment has been returned completely or not, Epicor creates a brand new single FIFO layer for that remaining quantity used previously. So lot FIFO follows the same logic. RMA returns are a little bit different with lot numbers, but they're not, because Epicor does not use the lot number for the FIFO layer return. It's looking at the invoice in line and doesn't drive down to the lot numbers. So there are new layers created when it's actually received into stock. Again, that's coming back into stock. It doesn't activate the original layer. It creates a new layer because it's a entirely different cost and part from the system perspective and behind the scenes. If the RMA disposition has the override cost or used current cost set to enabled, a cost accountant's nightmare, then the system will ignore the FIFO layers from the invoice in line or the generic shipment transaction and uses the disposition costs entered by the user that received it to stock and creates a single FIFO layer for that RMA return. See where you can get yourself in trouble with that one, because if somebody doesn't know the costs and you want to put that into the system, you've now created a layer and a cost, a FIFO cost on a part that you've received into stock with who knows what type of cost that a quality person or a stockroom person has put in there, if the override cost or used current cost is set to be enabled. So let's talk about this one a little bit. So I have this part ABC has a costing method of FIFO with the following layers. 5 different receipts. So I have 2-1, 2-2, 2-3, 2-4, 2-5. They were all received in quantity of 2 on each of those. So I have a total quantity of 10. And each of those had a different cost when they came into. So now I go and I do the shipments. My first shipment, I had a quantity of 3. My invoice line, FIFO went out. It took the quantity of 2 from that first FIFO layer, because there was 2 on it at $100 each. Then I have the second layer has to be used because I still need another quantity. So I have a quantity of 1 for it, for a 2. So now I have $400 total. My weighted average is $133.67. Rounded. So then I have another shipment. I have the second shipment for a quantity of 4 that happened. So I now have on my second layer, I only have 1 left. Then I have 2 from my third layer, and it only had 2 in stock. And now I have my fourth layer that I have to take 1 out of. So I have 400, 600, and 200. So I have $1,200 for those 4. So my weighted average cost for this shipment is $300. See how your weighted average changes, but then my FIFO layer costs are going to all be coming across, and my FIFO costs are going to stay to be the actual FIFO that was for those layers that went out the door. And then I have my third shipment that I did just to complete the 10 that I did have in stock, because I don't like to keep anything in stock. I want my turns to be very quick. So now, unfortunately, I got an RMA for the part, and they are returning 6. Wait a minute. And it's for that first invoice number in line. So that's more than what I had on that invoice in line. That invoice in line only had 3. So I'm receiving an additional 3 that they're sending back, and that's the invoice number in line that they gave me. So what happens? I return FIFO 2 for the quantity of 1. But why only 1? Because that's all that went out on that initial invoice. And then I have FIFO 1 for the quantity of 2. Remember, the system uses the reverse order when it goes and does the FIFOs back. So when I'm receiving them back into inventory, in this case, I'm receiving it back into inventory off of an RMA. It does it in the reverse FIFO order. And then my FIFO 5 was my last shipment, and it's going to use that as my reference cost. It's not taking the quantity, it's using my reference cost for that. So now I receive a second RMA. They called again, and now I have another RMA for the part for a quantity of 3. And they use that third invoice number. So although 5 was used as a reference cost under the original, now I'm going to actually use that FIFO layer as a return, because that's what was used when we did that initial shipment. When we go back and you look at that shipment that we did, that shipment was, third shipment was used FIFO layer 4 and FIFO layer 5. So those 2 layers are going to come back in. FIFO layer 5 is going to come back in. Again, remember, we do reverse order, but it's sequence number 4, because I'm receiving these all back in at the same time. And its quantity was 2 at 500, and my quantity, and my second one for making the 3 was from FIFO layer 4 that came back in. So that's how RMAs process those. Little backwards at times, you think, but when you take and you lay the process out, it makes sense that it would take the oldest and then reverse the order as it processes in. And again, to come back to when we do RMAs, if it's at all possible to get that invoice number, it can help you tremendously as you're doing that. So with that, let's go through the front side of the process with a couple costing examples here. So this is going to use, I say lot FIFO, again, I'll say FIFO as well. I have 4 shipments or 4 purchase receipts for part 6247. Each part shipment or part receipt is tracked using a different cost cube, because in this example I was kind of using the lot FIFO methodology. Even though the part wasn't lot controlled, I can still use the lot FIFO. Not always recommended because every one of them need to come in. So this first one, I have 4 that came here. I have 4 different sequences that came in. So I had 4 different costs that came from the supplier associated to this same exact part. Hopefully your buyers are looking at this and going, well, wait a minute, why is he charging me different costs for the same exact thing, and I'm getting them pretty much at the same time? But for this example, we're going to say that did go through, and that's the way they were. So my first sequence that was received, I had 4, and they were $7 each for $28. Second sequence was for 6 for $7. and so on. I have 10 for 6, and I have another 10 for 5. So my total quantity is 30, and my extended cost is $180. If I look at my lot FIFO average cost, the calculation methodology is the quantity times the cost. And you divide it by the total quantity that you have. So I have $6 as my average, lot FIFO average. That is not the lot FIFO cost. That is the lot FIFO average cost. And in the system, all of these cost methods and that we're talking about here are stored in there, and you can use them for different things as you do calculations. Dashboards are a good thing that people like to use to look at some of these things. And again, reports that we can help you develop and design if you would like to have something like that. And you see my weighted average cost, it's $180 divided by the 30, the total cost divided by the 30. So now 5 items are issued from inventory to my WIP. 1 cost queue record is totally consumed. So my first cost queue record had 4, and I need 1 for the next cost queue from the next cost queue record. So now I'm going to consume this first cost queue record, and I'm going to use 1 from the second cost queue record. So now I have 25 left for an extended cost of $150. So my lot FIFO average cost after this is 0 because I don't have anything left in that first one, and I have my 5 times. So, and then I still have to divide it by the total quantity, which was 30, and it comes to $4.83. My weighted average cost takes my 180 minus the 5 times $6, because I had the $6, divided by 30 minus the 5. Again, it gets to be a little bit complex with the calculation when it talks about weighted average costs, which we're not talking about today, but that's $150. So 150 divided by the 25 that are left is the $6 on my average cost. That's how LIFO uses for this example that we just went through. Let's drive through another example that we have that I've put together for you that might give you a little bit better explanation and make you see a little bit differently. I have 4 different layers, and in these layers, my first layer, which is the FIFO, the first one that was in, it had 150 originally, but I've used some of them and I just have 55 left. Second one had 75, 60, and 40, and they all have different, each costs for them because they were all different, received at different times and different points. So you see my sequences, 1, 2, 3, and 4 associated to this. If they were received at different dates, all of those would be sequence 1. So I have a transaction I've processed that relieves 45 units from the inventory. System checks. My FIFO layer and determines that the oldest contains sufficient quantity to cover the transaction, so it takes and uses it. And this physical transaction itself uses a unit cost of 8.4920, which was my unit cost for that layer, and multiplies it by the 45. So I have $382.14 that went out of inventory into, we're going to say, a job. So now you see I have 10 left in stock on that original layer at this point because I just relieved 45. Now I'm going to do a transaction that relieves 20 from there. The system checks and sees, oh, I only have 10 for that first layer. I've got to go to the next FIFO sequence or next FIFO layer, and that layer has enough to cover the remaining quantity. The system deducts the 10 units from the first layer, deactivates it, doesn't delete it, and then the other 10 from sequence number 2. So my unit cost is the the 10 times the 8.492, which was the first layer, and 10 times 9.2601 for the second layer, takes those two and divides that by the 20 and gives me 8.8761, which is the lot FIFO average cost for this transaction. So this transaction gets processed at 8.8761 times the 20 for $177.521. So now I have 0 left in my first layer. It's deactivated. And then I have 65 left in the second and the full third and fourth layers. So with that, that's how FIFO costing can get a little bit complex when it comes to seeing how the costs are actually taken out of inventory and put onto your job, and can give you a little bit of a scratch of the head at times, because it uses the FIFO cost, but if it's using multiple layers, it's using the FIFO average cost to put the quantity into the job itself. Like I said, what we were going to leave for the last was the transactions, and I'm not going to read each of these to you because you guys have the abilities to be able to read these, and you know a little bit more about FIFO and processes. This first one is the hierarchy of how it uses, the transaction uses the costing defined on the part site record. Good point to make here is when you are using costing, remember you have multiple places that your costing methods are set up. It's on the main part transaction, on the main part maintenance record, but it is also on the site record. So if you change one, do you want two different types of cost methods? Think about that when you are doing this, and if you're doing an initial setup or if you're doing any changes. If you change your part maintenance from standard to FIFO, it's going to ask you if you want to change your site. You might want to think, do I want my site to be FIFO? And if you're changing your main part, you might want to really have that way. If you have different sites and you want different costing methods in your sites, then there's where you can do that. Okay. And as it says, it uses the part site first, and if it doesn't find one there, it uses the part detail, and then the transaction uses the costing method defined on the company, because there is a company default costing method if you don't have any costing methods defined on your parts. And then these are the transactions and how they go through. So like my receive into inventory, I receive the quantity from the PO receipt and transfer the order into inventory. It creates a new cost queue record for each quantity received and each date and time. And I'll let you read the rest of these as you go through this document. It's a lot of pieces inside here. So we have our issue from inventory, our return material, so if I don't consume it on the job, I can return it back. Return from the customer, we went through your RMA process a little bit. And then we have our adjustments, increasing and decreasing your inventory, and then doing a cost adjustment. So I want to thank you for taking the time to listen about FIFO costing a little bit today. We scratched the surface. It's a very deep subject that when you talk about costing methods, and especially with FIFO costing and how and where transactions and costs go to. But we also have up on our website additional documents, including some business process procedures, tips and tricks. The webinar recordings, these go up there as well, along with some business process how-to videos. I encourage you to visit our website and look under our ERP resources under the Epicor. Thank you again for taking the time to listen today, and I will turn this back over to Mr. Burns.
Great. Thanks, Warren. As always, it's enlightening to hear your expertise and experience coming through. when we're looking over some of these somewhat difficult topics. So there was one question that came in. That question was, are there any slight differences in the RMA process between FIFO and lot FIFO?
Really not on the RMA process, because it doesn't use the lot number when it comes back in to pull the cost. It uses the invoice in line or the generic ship.
Right. So, Warren, you've been doing this for more years than you probably care to recall. Part costing, especially in the FIFO, where does that fall in the difficulty scale from what you've seen with customers over the years?
FIFO costing gives the cost accountants probably one of the hardest things to always tackle, because it's FIFO when they go in, but then when they're used on the job, if you don't have enough of the quantities, you then start getting some average that gets put to the job, and now it's like, wait a minute, I had both of these different costs. What happened to the costs? And it kind of gets into a blended rate element.
Right. It certainly seems that way, but you did a great job of breaking it down for us. So I want to thank Warren. I want to thank everybody who joined the call today. Hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Please visit our website at www.crawford-software.com for more information on upcoming webinars. Our next webinar will be on Wednesday, November 14th at noon Eastern, and we'll cover part costing in Epicor 10.2 using average cost. You can register from our website for the webinar, or look for an email invitation that will come shortly from us. So on behalf of our founder, Steve Carr, and all of us at Crawford Software, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thanks, and have a great day.